Commander Zyx'nax of the Galactic Conquest fleet stared at the view screen with what passed for a smirk on his gelatinous face. Earth, that insignificant blue marble, was finally within their grasp. Years of careful planning, meticulous research, and enough paperwork to choke a Borgolian space whale had led to this moment. Status report, he burbled, his voice a mix of barely contained excitement and the sound of a washing machine on its last legs. Lieutenant Blob Blip oozed over to his console, leaving a trail of slime that the cleaning drones would undoubtedly complain about later. All systems are go, Commander. Our cloaking technology is functioning perfectly. The humans remain blissfully unaware of our presence, as usual. Zyx'nax's body rippled with satisfaction. Excellent. Prepare the invasion force. It's time to show these humans what real galactic power looks like. As the crew scurried, or rather, squelched about, making final preparations, Zyx'nax couldn't help but chuckle. These humans, with their pitiful technology and fragile bodies, would be no match for the might of the Galactic Conquest fleet. Sure, they had some amusing quirks like their insistence on covering their bodies with colorful fabrics, or their bizarre obsession with capturing images of their sustenance before consumption, but they were hardly a threat. Little did Zyx'nax know, the universe had a sense of humor more twisted than a pretzel in a hurricane. Meanwhile, on the surface of Earth, blissfully unaware of the impending alien invasion, sat Chuck McGraw. Chuck was what you might call a man's man if by man you meant grizzly bear with a beard, and by man's you meant capable of bench-pressing a small car. He was currently perched on a log in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness, contemplating the meaning of life, liberty, and the perfect way to grill a steak. You know, Bertha, Chuck mused to his trusty axe, which he had affectionately named after his ex-wife. Both were equally sharp and dangerous when swung. I reckon it's about time we caught ourselves some dinner. What do you say, girl? Bertha, being an inanimate object, said nothing. Chuck took this as enthusiastic agreement. With a grunt that would make a caveman proud, Chuck heaved himself to his feet and set off into the dense forest. He moved with the grace of a bulldozer and the subtlety of a foghorn, sending small animals scurrying for cover and making nearby trees consider uprooting themselves for safer pastures. As Chuck trudged through the undergrowth, he remained blissfully unaware that he was about to become the unwitting star of the greatest intergalactic reality show never commissioned. Back on the alien mothership, the invasion preparations were in full swing. Weapons were being charged, battle plans finalized, and the traditional pre-invasion snacks were being passed around. Turns out, even gelatinous beings from the far reaches of the galaxy can't resist a good cheese puff. Commander Lieutenant Blob Blip called out, his voice a mix of confusion and alarm. We're picking up some strange readings from the planet's surface. Zyx'nax oozed over to the console, his curiosity piqued. What kind of readings, Lieutenant? Have the humans detected us? No, Sir, Blob Blip replied, his tentacles dancing over the controls. It's a life form. But the readings are off the charts. It's like nothing we've ever seen before. Zyx'nax's eyes, all 17 of them, widened. Put it on the main viewer. Let's see what we're dealing with. The massive screen flickered to life, revealing a dense forest. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, with all the subtlety of a rhino in a china shop, Chuck McGraw burst into view. The alien crew watched in stunned silence as the human, if it could be called, that moved through the forest. Every step seemed to shake the ground, every swing of his arms threatened to uproot nearby trees. And was he talking to an axe? By the slimy tentacles of the great space squid, Zyx'nax breathed, his gelatinous body quivering with a mix of fear and awe. What manner of creature is this? As if in answer to his question, a massive grizzly bear lumbered into the frame. The aliens watched, expecting the human to flee in terror. Instead, Chuck McGraw's face split into a grin that would make a shark reconsider its life choices. Well, Chuck chuckled, his voice carrying clearly through the ship's advanced audio sensors. Looks like dinner just volunteered itself. What do you say, Bertha? Shall we introduce ourselves? What happened next would go down in galactic history as the moment the Galactic Conquest fleet collectively soiled themselves, metaphorically speaking. Of course, it's hard to soil oneself when one is essentially a sentient pudding. Chuck McGraw, armed with nothing but his trusty axe and a beard that could double as a briar patch, charged at the grizzly bear. The bear, clearly not used to its prey running towards it, had just enough time for its ursine brain to process a single thought: oh, phoo. The ensuing battle was a whirlwind of fur, fists, and colorful expletives that would make a sailor blush. Chuck grappled with the bear, as if it were nothing more than an overgrown puppy, laughing all the while. "Come on, you overgrown throw rug," Chuck bellowed, his voice a mix of laughter and grunts of exertion. "Is that all you've got? I've had pillow fights tougher than this." The bear, for its part, seemed to be seriously reconsidering its life choices. It had woken up that morning expecting to forage for berries and maybe catch a salmon or two. Instead, it found itself locked in mortal combat with what appeared to be the unholy offspring of Paul Bunyan and a particularly angry mountain. On the alien ship, pandemonium reigned. Crew members were running in circles as much as gelatinous beings can run. Alarms were blaring, and more than one alien was seriously considering a career change to something less stressful, like diffusing black holes or negotiating peace treaties with Hangryxene. Commander Lieutenant Blob Blip wailed, his voice rising to a pitch that threatened to shatter every transparent surface on the ship. "What do we do? We can't possibly invade a planet where the inhabitants fight apex predators for fun." Zyx'nax, for once in his life, was at a loss for words. He watched, transfixed, as Chuck McGraw continued to wrestle with the bear, occasionally pausing to deliver what sounded suspiciously like wrestling commentary. "Oh, and it's a left hook from the human," Chuck roared, dodging a swipe from the bear's massive paw. The bear counters with a right claw, but wait. The human ducks under and goes for a double-leg takedown. This is unprecedented in the annals of interspecies wrestling, folks. The bear, at this point, had progressed from confusion to outright existential crisis. In its years roaming the Alaskan wilderness, it had encountered all manner of creatures, but never had it met something that treated a life or death struggle like a Sunday afternoon game of fetch. As the battle raged on, the alien crew found themselves inadvertently taking sides. Bets were placed, alliances formed, and more than one heated argument broke out over whether Chuck's beard should be classified as a separate combatant. 20 Glorbecks on the human, shouted one crew member. "You're on," replied another. "That bear's got at least 100 pounds on him." "Have you seen the size of that axe?" a third chimed in. "I'm putting 50 Glorbecks on the axe." Meanwhile, Chuck was having the time of his life. As he ducked and weaved, occasionally landing a solid punch on the bear's snout, he kept up a running commentary that was part boxing announcer, part stand-up comedian. "Ladies and gentlemen, and all ursine species in between," he bellowed, narrowly avoiding a swipe that would have taken off a less fortunate man's head. "Welcome to today's main event." In this corner, weighing in at a svelte 800 pounds and sporting the latest in fur fashion, we have the reigning champion of the forest, the Sultan of Swat, the king of the woods. Let's hear it for Mr. Grizzly. The bear, momentarily confused by the impromptu introduction, paused its attack and tilted its head, as if to say, "Are you quite finished?" Chuck, never one to miss an opportunity, used this moment of confusion to his advantage. With a move that would make professional wrestlers weep with envy, he ducked under the bear's guard, wrapped his arms around its midsection, and executed a perfect suplex. The forest floor shook as hundreds of pounds of very surprised bear hit the ground. Trees swayed, birds took flight, and somewhere in the distance, a seismologist's equipment registered what they would later describe as the weirdest damn earthquake I've ever seen. On the alien ship, chaos had given way to a stunned silence. Even the alarms seemed to have quieted in awe of the spectacle unfolding before them. Did he just?" Lieutenant Blob Blip began, his voice a mix of terror and grudging admiration. "Suplex a bear," Commander Zyx'nax finished, his gelatinous form quivering with a mix of fear and something that, in a less militaristic species, might have been called respect. "Yes, Lieutenant, yes he did." As the dust settled, Chuck stood triumphant over the dazed bear. But instead of finishing off his opponent, he did something that made the watching aliens question everything they thought they knew about combat, survival, and the nature of sanity itself. He helped the bear up. "Good fight, big guy," Chuck laughed, patting the bear on its massive shoulder as if they were old drinking buddies. "You've got a mean right hook there. Ever considered a career in the circus? I hear they're always looking for talented performers." The bear, still trying to process what exactly had just happened, let out a confused growl that sounded suspiciously like what the actual few. Chuck, either oblivious to or simply unfazed by the bear's confusion, continued chatting away, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Now, I know what you're thinking. Chuck, old boy, why aren't you turning me into a new rug for your man cave? Well, let me tell you something, my Ursine friend. Where's the fun in that? Besides, do you have any idea how much paperwork is involved in bear hunting these days? I swear, the bureaucracy in this country is getting worse than. Well, I was going to say worse than wrestling a bear, but I guess we both know that's actually pretty fun, huh? The bear, still dazed from its unexpected flying lesson, could only blink in response. It was experiencing what can only be described as an existential crisis of ursine proportions. Here it was, apex predator of the forest, terror of hikers and campers alike, and it had just been outfought, outmaneuvered, and out-talked by a creature that, by all rights, should have been nothing more than a particularly chatty meal. Meanwhile, on the alien ship, the crew was experiencing a crisis of their own. Everything they thought they knew about humans gathered from years of careful observation, data analysis, and binge-watching Earth's reality TV shows was being turned on its head. Commander Lieutenant Blob Blip ventured, his voice quivering like a bowl of particularly nervous jello. I think we may need to reconsider our invasion plans. Commander Zyx'nax, still transfixed by the scene on the view screen, could only nod in agreement. Lieutenant, I believe you may be right. I'm beginning to think we may have underestimated these humans. As if to drive this point home, Chuck chose that moment to demonstrate yet another aspect of human unpredictability. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out what appeared to be a large slab of meat. "Here you go, big fella," he said, tossing the steak to the still bewildered bear. "No hard feelings, right? Consider it a peace offering, or a thanks for the workout gift, whichever floats your boat, or I guess in your case, whichever catches your salmon." The bear, its survival instincts warring with its utter confusion, cautiously sniffed at the offered meat. After a moment's hesitation, it seemed to shrug as much as a bear can shrug in a why-the-hell-not gesture, and began to chow down. Chuck, apparently satisfied with this turn of events, plopped himself down on a nearby log. "You know," he mused, addressing both the bear and his ever-present axe, Bertha. "This reminds me of the time I got into a drinking contest with a moose up in Anchorage. Now there's an animal that can hold its liquor. Did you know moose can get drunk on fermented apples? Learned that the hard way. Let me tell you." As Chuck launched into what promised to be an epic tale of interspecies inebriation, the alien crew found themselves drawn in despite themselves. Invasion plans were forgotten, battle stations abandoned, as they clustered around view screens, hanging on every word of this bizarre human story. So there I was, Chuck continued, gesticulating wildly, 3 sheets to the wind, arm wrestling a moose in the middle of O'Malley's bar, with half the Anchorage Police Department placing bets and the other half trying to figure out how to write up this particular incident report. On the ship, an alien crew member turned to his companion. "What's a sheet? And why does being 3 of them to the wind affect one's ability to wrestle large herbivores?" His companion shrugged, a gesture they had picked up from hours of observing human behavior. "I don't know, but I've got 20 Glorbex riding on the moose." As Chuck's tale reached its inevitably chaotic climax, involving an impromptu moose rodeo, a confused pizza delivery guy, and the strategic use of a karaoke machine as a defensive weapon, Commander Zyx'nax came to a decision. "Crew," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has stared into the abyss and found the abyss staring back, possibly while wearing a Kiss the Cook apron, "I believe we need to reevaluate our position on Earth and its inhabitants." A murmur of agreement rippled through the ship. After what they had just witnessed, the idea of invading Earth seemed about as wise as trying to knit a sweater for a son. But Commander, one brave soul ventured, "What about our mission? The High Council expects us to conquer this planet." Zyx'nax fixed the speaker with all 17 of his eyes. "And what, precisely, do you propose we do? March down there and attempt to subdue creatures who treat apex predators like wrestling partners and tell stories that defy the laws of physics and common sense? I may be ambitious, but I'm not suicidal." There was a moment of silence as the crew contemplated this. The only sound was Chuck's voice, still audible through the ship's sensors, now explaining to the bear, who seemed to be listening with rapt attention, the finer points of using salmon as improvised nunchucks. "Besides," Zyx'nax continued, a sly tone entering his voice, "who says we have to tell the High Council the whole truth? As far as they know, we arrived, assessed the situation, and determined that Earth is unsuitable for conquest. A ripple of understanding spread through the crew. It wasn't often that a mission of galactic conquest turned into an impromptu lesson in creative report writing. But then again, nothing about this day had gone according to plan. In fact, Zyx'nax mused, warming to his theme, I believe we have a duty to stay and observe. For scientific purposes, of course. We need to study these humans, understand their ways. It's the only way to truly assess the potential threat they pose to galactic security. The crew nodded enthusiastically. The fact that this observation would likely involve a lot more watching of Earth's entertainment broadcasts and a lot less actual invasion planning was, of course, purely coincidental. Now, Zyx'nax continued, his gelatinous form quivering with what might have been excitement or possibly just the after effects of too many cheese puffs. Let's establish a long-term observation post, and someone get me the galactic equivalent of popcorn. I have a feeling this is going to be more entertaining than the time we watched the Blob Olympics. As the alien ship settled into orbit, its crew eagerly preparing for their new mission of scientific observation, Chuck McGraw was wrapping up his impromptu storytelling session. And that, my furry friend, he concluded, slapping the bear on its massive shoulder, is why you should never trust a moose with your credit card, especially during happy hour. The bear, having long since finished its piece offering steak, let out a noise that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. It had given up trying to make sense of this strange, loud creature and had settled for enjoying the show. Chuck stretched, his joints popping like a string of firecrackers in a tin can. Well, it's been fun, but I reckon it's time I headed back to camp. The missus will be wondering where I've got to, and let me tell you, she's scarier than you when she's riled up. No offense. The bear, seemingly relieved that this bizarre encounter was coming to an end, grunted in what might have been agreement. As Chuck gathered his things, he paused, struck by a thought. Say, you wouldn't happen to know if there are any good fishing spots around here, would you? I promised the wife I'd bring back something for dinner, and after our little tussle, I'm not sure I'm up for hunting anything more challenging than a particularly aggressive trout. The bear, in a moment that would have made nature documentarians question their entire careers, actually seemed to consider the question. After a moment, it lumbered to its feet and started off into the forest, pausing to look back at Chuck, as if to say, well, are you coming or not? Chuck's face split into a grin that would have made the Cheshire Cat consider taking notes. Well, I'll be damned. Looks like I've made a new fishing buddy. Lead on, Yogi. And so, in a turn of events that would have made Darwin throw up his hands in despair, Chuck McGraw and his new ursine companion set off through the Alaskan wilderness in search of the perfect fishing spot. Little did they know, their every move was being watched by an increasingly bewildered alien audience. On the ship, Commander Zyx'nax turned to his crew, his expression a mix of confusion, awe, and what might have been the beginnings of hysteria. Are you all seeing this? Please tell me you're all seeing this, and I haven't just gone insane from an overdose of cheese puffs. Lieutenant Blob Blip, who had been frantically taking notes for purely scientific reasons, of course, nodded vigorously. We're seeing it, Commander, though I'm not entirely sure I believe it. As they watched Chuck and the bear make their way through the forest, occasionally pausing for Chuck to point out interesting flora, or for the bear to mark its territory, much to Chuck's vocal amusement. The aliens found themselves drawn into a world that defied every expectation they had held about Earth and its inhabitants. You know, mused one of the junior officers, a look of wonder on his gelatinous face, I'm starting to think we may have seriously misjudged these humans. Commander Zyx'nax could only nod in agreement. Indeed, Ensign Gloop. Indeed. I believe we may need to reclassify Earth from easy conquest to approach with extreme caution, possibly while hiding behind something very large and very sturdy. As the day wore on, the alien crew found themselves utterly captivated by the ongoing adventures of Chuck McGraw and his unlikely ursine companion. They watched in amazement as Chuck taught the bear the finer points of fly fishing, complete with an improvised demonstration using his beard as a makeshift fly. Now pay attention. Smoky Chuck's voice boomed through the ship's speakers, causing several aliens to jump or at least jiggle vigorously. The key to a good cast is all in the wrist. It's like swatting a mosquito with a wet noodle. You've got to find just the right balance of force and finesse. The bear, to its credit, seemed to be paying rapt attention, its head tilting from side to side as it watched Chuck's demonstration. Whether it was actually learning or simply mesmerized by the bizarre dance of man and fishing rod was anyone's guess. On the ship, bets were once again being placed. 10 Glorbeck says the bear catches a fish before the human shouted one crew member. 20 says the human uses the bear as a boat, countered another. 50 says they both fall in and end up starting an underwater wrestling league, chimed in a third, earning a mix of confused stares and thoughtful nods. Commander Zyx'nax, for his part, had given up any pretense of maintaining order. He sat in his command chair, a bowl of space popcorn in his lap, utterly transfixed by the scene unfolding before him. As the day progressed, Chuck and his new friend engaged in what could only be described as the most unorthodox fishing expedition in the history of Earth, and quite possibly the galaxy. Chuck's booming laugh and constant stream of commentary, punctuated by the occasional grunt or growl from the bear, provided a soundtrack that had the alien crew alternating between fits of laughter and moments of stunned silence. Did he just use the bear as a living fishing rod? Lieutenant Blip asked incredulously as they watched Chuck attempt to guide the bear's paw into the water to scoop up a particularly elusive salmon. I believe he did, Commander Zyx'nax replied, his voice a mix of awe and resignation. I also believe we need to seriously reconsider our definition of intelligent life, and possibly sanity as well. As the sun began to set over the Alaskan wilderness, Chuck and his bear buddy had managed to catch an impressive haul of fish, using methods that ranged from the unconventional to the downright bizarre. The alien crew had watched in fascination as Chuck demonstrated everything from bare-handed salmon catching, which mostly resulted in him getting very wet, and the fish getting away, to an impromptu attempt at using his beard as a fishing net, surprisingly more successful than anyone, including Chuck, had anticipated. Finally, as the light began to fade, Chuck turned to his ursine companion with a grin that somehow managed to be both friendly and slightly unhinged. Well, boo-boo, it's been a real pleasure, but I reckon it's time for me to head on home. The missus will be wondering where I've got to, and I've got one hell of a story to tell her. The bear, seeming almost reluctant to see this strange adventure come to an end, let out a low grunt that might have been agreement or possibly indigestion from the raw fish it had been snacking on throughout the day. Chuck gathered up his impressive catch, somehow managing to string together a makeshift carry system using nothing but some twine, a couple of branches, and what appeared to be his own shoelaces. As he prepared to leave, he turned back to the bear one last time. Now, don't be a stranger, you hear? Next time you're in the neighborhood, feel free to stop by. We'll have a barbecue. I make a mean salmon steak, though I suppose you prefer yours au natural, huh? He let out a booming laugh at his own joke, slapping the bear on the shoulder hard enough to make the massive creature stumble slightly. The bear, in a moment that would have made wildlife biologists question their entire careers, actually seemed to nod in agreement. It then did something that caused every single alien observer to question their sanity simultaneously. It held out a massive paw, as if for a handshake. Chuck, without missing a beat, grasped the paw and gave it a hearty shake. Well, I'll be damned. You're a gentleman and a scholar, Yogi. Or I guess in your case, a gentle bear and whatever bears have instead of scholars, a honey connoisseur, maybe. With one final wave returned, to the aliens' continued disbelief, by a raised paw from the bear, Chuck set off back towards his camp, whistling a jaunty tune, and seemingly oblivious to the fact that he had just spent the day engaging in activities that defied every law of nature, common sense, and quite possibly physics. As Chuck disappeared into the gathering dusk, the bear stood watching for a long moment. Then, with a shake of its massive head that seemed to say, "Did that really just happen?" it lumbered off into the forest, presumably in search of a strong drink and possibly a therapist. On the alien ship, a stunned silence had fallen. The crew stared at the now empty view screen, their gelatinous forms quivering with a mix of emotions that their species had never experienced before and probably didn't have names for. Commander Zyx'nax was the first to break the silence. "Well," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has stared into the abyss and found the abyss staring back, possibly while wearing a kiss the cook. Apron and holding a fishing rod, I believe we can safely say that our initial assessment of Earth may have been somewhat underestimated. Lieutenant Blob Blip, still furiously taking notes, though at this point they had devolved into a series of incredulous question marks and crude drawings of bearded stick figures wrestling bears, nodded vigorously. Underestimated, sir? I think we may need to invent entirely new words to describe just how wrong we were. Commander Zyx'nax turned to address his crew, his gelatinous form quivering with what might have been excitement, fear, or possibly just an urgent need to find the nearest restroom. Crew of the Galactic Conquest Fleet, I believe we find ourselves at a crossroads. We came here expecting an easy conquest, a simple addition to our ever-expanding empire. Instead, we have found this. He gestured vaguely at the view screen, which was now showing a replay of Chuck using his beard as a fishing lure. I propose. He continued, his voice taking on a tone of solemnity that was only slightly undercut by the soft plop of space popcorn falling from his lap, that we abort our invasion plans immediately. More than that, I suggest we classify Earth as a protected planet, off limits to all future conquest attempts. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. After what they had witnessed, the idea of trying to conquer Earth seemed about as wise as trying to arm wrestle a black hole while wearing oven mitts. Furthermore, Zyx'nax added, a sly tone entering his voice, I believe we have a duty to continue our observations. For scientific purposes, of course, we need to study these humans, understand their ways. It's the only way to truly assess the potential threat they pose to galactic security. The crew's agreement was much more enthusiastic this time. The fact that this observation would likely involve a lot more watching of Earth's entertainment broadcasts and a lot less actual invasion planning was, of course, purely coincidental. Now Zyx'nax concluded, settling back into his command chair with a fresh bowl of space popcorn. Let's see what other wonders this Chuck has in store for us. Something tells me we've only scratched the surface of what these humans are capable of. As the alien ship settled into a long-term orbit around Earth, its crew eagerly preparing for their new mission of scientific observation, Chuck McGraw was making his way back to his campsite, his mind already spinning with plans for his next adventure. You know, Bertha, he mused to his trusty axe, I'm thinking tomorrow we might try our hand at mountain climbing. I hear there's a nice little peak just a few miles from here, probably full of mountain goats. I've always wondered if goats can play poker. And so as the stars twinkled overhead, blissfully unaware of the potential intergalactic incident that had just been narrowly avoided, life on Earth continued as normal. Or at least, as normal as it ever got when Chuck McGraw was involved. And in the vast expanse of the cosmos, word began to spread. Whispered rumors of a small, blue planet inhabited by creatures so bizarre, so unpredictable, that even the mighty Galactic Conquest Fleet had turned tail and run. A planet where the line between predator and prey was not just blurred, but thoroughly erased, redrawn in crayon, and then eaten by a bear wearing a Kiss the Cook apron. Earth, it seemed, had inadvertently gained a reputation, and somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness, a very confused bear was seriously considering taking up fly fishing. The universe, it turned out, had a sense of humor after all, and it was laughing its cosmic socks off.